Throughout history, society has faced countless obstacles. One of the most pressing issues has been, and still is, racism. The Harlem Globetrotters are a unique example of how a team, a sport, and an ambitious owner can transcend adversity and come together to unite clashing peoples. The Globetrotters were born in an era that featured violent race riots, the revival of the KKK, brutal lynchings, and the Jim Crow laws. This decade was no easier for immigrants, especially Jewish people, with the passing of the National Origins Act and the open anti-Semitism from prominent figures like Hitler and Father Coughlin. However, Abe Saperstein would not let this deter him. As a child, he had played countless sports and earned 9 letters in high school, proving that a Jewish man who was 5'3" could compete and excel at what was considered something for wasps. From these experiences, Abe learned that a sport was a great equalizer, and realized that he could use this to market an all-black basketball team. So he went to the Savoy Ballroom on Chicago's South Side and asked them to sponsor a team. This, however, did not bring in enough money, so Abe decided to take his team on the road. For marketing reasons and to show whites that this was an all-black team, Abe named the team the Harlem Globetrotters. In the early years, the Charters would travel as far as Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan, playing local teams in obscure places like barns and swimming pools. Although people came to the games and enjoyed the show, it was not the same off the court.
Jim Crow laws were very much in effect, and it was very hard for Globetrotters. Most of the time they would come back to Chicago after a game because they wouldn't serve them in restaurants. They wouldn't let them stay in restaurants.
The NBA was not accepting blacks. Globetrotters were an all-black team. For my dad, it was his only alternative. He played at Bradley University. They were national champs his junior year. Next year, he goes to the Detroit Pistons training camp. And I found out that he was the best guard in the camp. But at that particular time, there was a silent quota in the NBA that they only wanted 2 blacks per team. My father fell victim of that. The Globetrotters at one time had the best black basketball players in the world. The NBA, the Globetrotters were more popular than the NBA at one time. The Globetrotters used to play a doubleheader with the NBA, just so audiences have some interest in the NBA. I don't know if you knew that.
Even though the Trotters were more popular than professional leagues, many people still did not acknowledge their talent. Abe and the team would have none of it. Countless people pointed to the Trotters' style of play, saying they were nothing more than a minstrel show, sambles, playing in barns, who didn't belong with whites. While the Trotters would prove these people wrong, they could play serious ball. The tricks were merely a way to entertain the crowd and give the players a little time to catch their breath. The perfect chance would come in 1948. George Mikan, the great white hope, and his mighty Minneapolis Lakers came to Chicago Stadium. Before a crowd of over 20,000 people, the Trotters faced the best basketball team, matching them play for play. The game came down to the wire. With 5 seconds left and the score tied, the Trotters had the ball in the hands of Ermer Robinson. Despite all odds, Robinson hit the shot. The fans went nuts. Blacks and whites stood up together and cheered. A truly unique moment. This game is considered one of the early catalysts of the civil rights movement, engineered by Abe Saperstein and the now world-famous Harlem Globetrotters. Following the Trotters' monumental win, people started to realize the talent of African-American players. In 1950, the NBA's New York Knicks would forever change the sport of basketball, signing the Trotters' Nat Clifton. Finally, a sport once dominated by whites integrated and recognized that African Americans not only belonged but were equals on the court. Even with their growing popularity and numerous contributions, the Trotters did not ignore their loyal fan base.
They were called the ambassadors of goodwill long before you watch NBA games. You see this commercial that says NBA cares, and it'll show the players, in a soup kitchen. And so the players handing out Christmas gifts and Thanksgiving turkeys and all that kind of stuff. You see all that stuff now? Because we're doing all that humanitarian stuff 40 years ago, 40 and 50 years ago. The Globetrotters were called the ambassadors of goodwill.
The Globetrotters had already visited nations around the world that had poor relations with the U.S., like Argentina. After they played, something happened. A spark. The country suddenly saw that the U.S. was not as evil, as vile as they had thought. There was a hope for better things to come. Seeing this miraculous change of attitude in Argentina, the State Department had a brilliant idea. Send the Trotters and Jesse Owens to Berlin, behind the Iron Curtain, and show the world that the U.S. was unique. It was a powerful and diverse nation, one which valued all of its citizens and wanted other nations to do likewise.
He used his globetrotters to push the American image around the world. If you noticed, he deliberately made their uniforms the red, white, and blue. He used to say that he draped his globetrotters in the American flag. So it was very important to him. He was born on the 4th of July. So he always thought himself as a Yankee Doodle dandy, he said. And when we were walking through the crowd, going to the arena, I was walking in with Goose Tatum, and these communist children were asking him, is it true Mr. Saperstein has you work in the cotton fields before you go out and play basketball? This was the kind of things that they were being indoctrinated with as far as African American players. And they were making remarks like that, like the players were still slaves and my dad was a slave owner. And that stops everything. And then we went in and teams were lined up on both ends of the court, and there was a helicopter hovering overhead, and out of the helicopter came Jesse Owens in the track record, in the track suit he was wearing. Same field, same arena, 16 years before. And he proceeded to run around the track, ran around the field, holding two little American flags in his hands. And when he got around the second time, there was a man that was standing up in a box, and he announced that he was the mayor of Berlin. And he said to the crowd, Hitler refused your hand. Today, I give you both of mine. And everybody started crying, and I'm crying now. It was, and they clapped so loud, you couldn't even think. I've never had such an experience.
After reaching their climax in the 1950s, the Trotters started losing their primary talents to the NBA, yet they remained a part of popular culture.
And I've been to games in the South. I remember, I think it was in Alabama, this guy came up to me, he had a Ku Klux Klan hat on. Not the cape hat or whatever, just a hat that had the Ku Klux Klan symbol on it. Came up and asked me for my autograph for his son.
The Harlem Globetrotters went a long way over the course of the 20th century. They evolved from a barnstorming team to an elite squad that could match the best. They helped integrate basketball, fuel the civil rights movement at home and abroad, and enlighten a generation.